Hello. Thank you very much for joining us on the Modern Job Search Checklist. My name is Mark. I'm your host as always. I'm actually the co host. My other guy right next to me is Damian Birkel. Don't want to ever forget about him and what he does. He is the founder of Professionals of Transition, a group that's helped more than 10,000 folks find positions and an original OG in the career coaching space. We thank you so much. How's it going, Damien?
Real good. Thank you. Looking forward to the weekend and our chat. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, I think it's going to be a fun show, and we were able to get online with no problems at all. I want to welcome to the show, to this show. She was on the other show that I do on Wednesday. This is Ebony Joyce. She is the Career Clarity Coach, and you can find her at thenextlevel.com. Is that correct?
Next level
Next level.
career.co.
Correct. Thank you for correcting me. For some reason, that got missing in the graphics here, but
Oh, no problem.
we're happy to have her with us to join us today. She can keep up some noise, so you'll have to, keep up with all the gems that she's going to be dropping. It's like a heist around here. Anyway, we're going to have some fun, and these topics are very relative to your job search. And it's very important to look at how you're going to stand out in this very crowded job search and job market. If you have questions, feel free to get started in the chat right now. We'll be glad to stop and answer questions, even if it's irrelevant to what we're talking about, because we want to
Mhm.
help you on your journey. And that's the most important part, that we're giving you help to give you some useful and actionable items for you to go and apply to your job search as soon as you leave this show. In the meantime, the first topic we are tackling, you know, job search questions and interview questions are can be a little tricky, and a lot of people don't ask questions. And I'm just not going to put it on the women anymore. I think there's a lot of men who kind of get wrapped up in the moment and don't really look at the long view of asking questions after the interview and after all the time you spent talking. For most people, they wait for that moment of grandeur where at the end they're asked, do you have any questions? If you're smarter, of course, you want to weave your questions in with the conversation to make it a conversation. So we're going to start with Ebony. Are reasons why it's best to craft really careful and thoughtful job interview questions for the hiring managers or whoever else might be on the panels or whoever else you might be talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you. I think that it's important for a couple of reasons. One is it really shows how much research you've done, right? And your
Mhm.
interest into the company. So if you are coming with, thought-provoking questions that you can't just find online, it really lets them know, what your interest is. Within the organization. And so I think that that is key and most important, is really making sure that you're that the company is has spoken to you, and they speak, that curiosity comes through your questioning. So I
Mhm.
think that is very important.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Damien.
Yeah.
During any interview, the critical thing to do beyond all else is establish rapport. Rapport first, ability second. And I know that sounds funny, but it comes down to, if I like you, I may hire you. And
Mhm.
if I don't, I won't. And the power of strategic questions goes beyond the answers, because just like Mark said, they stop for a minute and they go, whoa, this guy or this girl really has it. And I'm with you, by the way. Um, have those questions in your mind, but weave them into the conversation, because you don't know where the conversation is going to go. And
Mhm.
by asking those types of questions and then really actively listening, lets the person on the other end know uh, that you are prepared, you are ready. But by far, the most important two things are, you have a grip on what the position and the needs are, and you bridge that with your abilities throughout. But many times the only way that that comes out is through the question and answer period. And when you have really good questions going back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
it changes the dynamics of the interview, because so many times, at least in my experience, people are petrified of an interview. And I understand that. But if you can ask questions along the way, you will learn. And the other thing is your intuition will get a chance to work also, because in the end, I have found across a number of job gains and losses that every time I went against my intuition, every single time I've lost. And if you're in an interview and it's only a one-way conversation, then you don't necessarily get a feel. You might even feel defensive or feel like you're getting drilled. Questions enable you to maintain secondary control, excuse me, control of the interview. Primary, of course, is the person who's interviewing you, but secondarily, again, you can steer the conversation in your favor.
Yeah, and you mentioned something I think is key, and this was kind of a small little gem that you just dropped, Damien. Having that dialogue and kind of weaving your questions, whether you do it in the middle, which I think is better, or at the end where you're assigned that particular time, it kind of gives the person that's asking the question, the interview, the hiring manager, whoever it is, HR person, a preview of what it's like to work with you during that
Mhm.
particular time. I think is very important to have that dynamic there. How about you, Ebony?
Yeah, that's why I like that Damien mentioned it's a back and forth. And so
Mhm.
I tell people all the time, you don't have to wait until the end of the interview for someone to say, "Do you have any questions?" to ask your questions. Let it flow. Let it be organic and natural. So, I mean, if they mention something that you have a question about, don't feel like you have to wait until they ask you at the end. So, build that. I think that's what that relationship component comes in into place, because it really just starts a volume of back and forth, and you really start to get a feel for who the person is sitting across from you, versus you feeling like you're in an interrogation, right? So
Right.
Right.
I think that it helps with your level of comfort and confidence when
Mhm.
you allow yourself to have some sense of control within the interviewing process. You can't control what questions they're going to ask or any of that.
Mhm.
But what you can control is yourself, right? And to determine up front, how you really want this interview to go, right? So
Mhm.
I think that that's really important. And so if you have prepared those questions and you've prepared and you've researched, if you did all your due diligence, you now can go into this interview and really determine, if this is the role for you, because that's really what we're here for. And if you only are allowing that individual or those individuals to ask you questions, then
Mhm.
you're really not vetting the company in a way that really lets you know if it's somewhere that you want to be. So I think it's really important for you to, again, that control is really up to you. And, you have to then go back and make an assessment and determine if this is an organization that you really want to work for.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I call it the Spanish Inquisition. You don't want it to be the Spanish Inquisition. And you don't know it, look, Google it sometime. It can remind you of some of the interviews you might have had where someone wanted to ask you lengthy questions and want you to go on and on until they get that answer. But, that's not going to happen in an interview, because really your silence is also indicative of your interest to them. Damien?
I agree. And here's another thing. People are often concerned about ageism, and if you're not afraid to ask a question, like if they say, what year did you graduate from high school, or what year for college, or tell me about your children.
Hmm.
If you can read into the question behind the question, you can look at them and say, that's a really good question. I'm just curious why you're asking. And right there,
Mm.
you flipped the interview. And if there was ageism, you've already grappled with it and again have maintained control without being intimidated.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think one of those questions is about the pandemic. And that's a good way for people, for interviewers to slickly find out what your family situation is and how you feel like working, whether it's hybrid or remote or in the office completely. You got to have enough intel before you go there to really go there. But that also, you have to understand why that question is important to ask that question and to give the answer, because that will dictate very often whether they will want to work with you or not. Ebony, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, good question. A good point that you bring up there in regards to the pandemic, right? So they may
Mhm.
be asking those questions in relationship to, how do you want to go, into this organization and work? And I think asking those questions, if you can't find more information about, how have they handled this situation, is very
Mhm.
important too, right? So,
Yep.
if you are going to be one of those individuals who want to be remote, or you're looking for that flexibility, at this time, making sure that you ask questions about, how they handle, certain issues such as, COVID and any other issues, is very important, because you want to make sure that, again, that this is the right fit for you. And the only way that you can really know that is by some of the questions that you decide to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. I really think that. And Damien, did you want to add anything for that?
Just think about it like this: as you frame your questions, you're also showing them how you think. And many times, a person who is sharp and can think quickly, in addition to being qualified, allows that person to build a stronger level of rapport. And by demonstrating how you think, you can feel through it and see, at the end of the day, if this is the type of company you work for. On the outside, it might sound terrific, but once you start the serious interviewing process, again, don't be afraid to ask questions. Secondary control of the interview, and back and forth is fine. And don't be afraid to turn up your charm.
Totally agree. And I do want to stick with this. I thought I was going to take up, but I do want to stick with this to get one more thing out there. As far as I think, to a certain degree, too, you have to have a question that for them, a pre-crafted question about the pandemic, because you certainly, as a job candidate, are going to be asked how you responded in the time that maybe you were off of work, or did you do something to enhance your skills, or how did you use that spare time? uh, Employers are going to want to know, and to disrupt your thinking, I think it's only right in return that you do so the same in the interview when you're asking a question. So Ebony, I'll start with you. Is there a favorite, that one question that seems to be a stomper for employers, as far as any feedback that you've gotten from your clients that people have asked employers about the pandemic? If there's not, that's okay. I'm working actually on an article that kind of is defining some questions about the pandemic that people can ask.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So, quite quite a few questions. Well, two questions I believe come to mind. One has been around time management in the pandemic, because a
Mhm.
lot of companies, or a lot of individuals, I will say, have, either it's part of their corporate culture to work or feel like you have to work more right now that you're not in the office, right? So that work-life balance has become more of an issue. So
Hmm.
definitely asking questions around, how do you, manage your time, or how is that expected for us now that we are working remote? Because a
Hmm.
lot of individuals sit at their desk from 8 to 5 with no breaks, right? Like you don't really know. So it's really important that you really understand what that culture is like. You should still take a break or do whatever. And then, people feel the need to be on more so because they are at home. And so then really understanding, what is that management skill like for your manager. A
Hmm.
few individuals have worked at companies where they are expected to be on camera all day. So,
Hmm.
yeah, so that's been very important to really understand what is your manager's management or leadership skill being away from the office. So, are they expecting you to, check in daily? Like, are they still micromanaging you, from afar, right?
Hmm.
So, because people can still feel like their job is at jeopardy when you're not in front of your management or leadership team. And so you really don't know, how to handle that. If no one can see me, how do they really know that I'm doing the job, right? And so, but I mean, they pay you to do that. But you really want to ask questions so that really have a level of understanding going into the organization, and you're not expected to, be online or, be tied to your computer, 24/7. So definitely asking questions about work-life balance, management, and leadership skills.
I think that's a very useful question, and it's a question that you would want to know whether you're going to be on the camera beyond even 9 to 5, if there's such a thing. Because some people may have to work in segments, which may mean you may have the afternoon
Oh yeah,
free, and then you have to work the evening. And what does that look like? So you
yeah.
definitely want to find that out. Damien, did you have one that seems to be the one that is pandemic related that you have people ask?
Um, First thing is read the company's news releases, because within those news releases, you'll find their public uh, status, if you will, or perspective that they are trying to um, provide to their consumer customers and their vendors. The
Hmm.
reason why I say read that is if you've already done that and you are in the interview, you can say something like, I read the news article about yada, 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 and how you are handling the pandemic. How is it going for you? How is it going for your people? And then keep your mouth shut and let them talk, because you will be surprised at how different bosses sometimes, certainly those that they're interviewing, how they behave, if you will, uh, as a result of the pandemic. And then related to that behavior, uh,
Hmm.
always be cognizant of what you're showing publicly, no matter where it is, because all someone has to do is Google your name, and it's there. And by the time that you get there, that may or may not have been done, but keep that in the back of your mind, because right after the interview, probably if they haven't already, they're going to look at your Facebook and anything else public.
Hmm.
So again, finding out how they handled the pandemic for their particular work team, again, enamors you to the person that you're interviewing with, because they're going, "Whoa, wow, he's really thinking not only about the company, not only about the job, but how I am managing my team."
Hmm.
And again, keep the conversation going.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a good one as well. I found that using the out of the box tools, and when I say out of the box, these are two tools that people don't realize that they're actually tools to find out what a company is like. You can one search YouTube for the
Mhm.
company, and maybe even people who are listed as leaders in those organizations, as they've given interviews to the press or even on podcasts. So it doesn't even hurt to search iTunes, maybe a couple of other podcasts, because you'd be surprised who gives an interview to a podcast that you never heard of. And on those podcasts, they are more likely to tell the truth than anywhere else, even if it was an investigative report on your favorite network television show. So one of the things that I thought was very interesting, and I did this kind of as an experiment for something entirely different, was that I one time found a client that way, found how she worked and how she worked. She told this on a podcast. But one of the questions I think that you can ask once you find that, you can find the intel on whether how well they did and how they were done. Because the thing today is how much transparency you're giving other people about your work and your company. In the same spirit of honesty, if you kind of know what the answer is, ask that particular question and ask how are you creating a cohesive team between remote and in office staff. And you ask that, I know especially a lot of young people are going to want to know, because they're concerned about, if I don't go back into the office, I won't be exposed. I won't have exposure to the big bosses and for them to see my work, et cetera, et cetera. And so I not only your question has to be very specific, but you have to have sort of a why for your question. And I think having a why for your question that targets your needs is going to also be so much more useful to you. You don't want to just ask a question just to be asking a question because we said so. I mean,
Mhm.
that's because a lot of people do that and they end up being lousy questions. They end up being disqualified because they can see, and a good interviewer can see from a mile away, you're not very prepared or very polished, are you? So you definitely, but you want to be thoughtful. The more insightful, even if it is disruptive, like that question, is going to get you somewhere. You guys want to add anything else to that before we move on?
Sometimes you might get blindsided by a question that
Yep.
you're not prepared for. And this is what I used to do when I was interviewing. They'd
Hmm.
ask the question, I'd have my holy crap moment, and then I would pause, look at them, smile, pause again, and say, that's a really good question. I need a minute to think about it. And in that time that you have kind of slowed the interview down and
Hmm.
reminded them that you think the question is interesting, it's just enough time for you to come up with a good, solid answer that won't make you look bad or embarrass you.
Right.
And also don't be afraid from the standpoint of uh, responding to their question. I mentioned responding with another question, but you can also take it and kind of redirect it and redirect it towards the business and see how you can kind of move off of the topic and on to something else that is more, you're more prepared to talk about, if you will. And most cases, the person that's interviewing you, it won't miss a beat, because what seems like an eternity for you while you're trying to come up with the
Absolutely. Yeah.
thought is mere seconds. But by
And
being able to do that, again, going back to what we were talking about, you can maintain secondary control of the interview.
yeah, I completely agree. That moment while you're trying to buy a little bit of time can seem like an eternity. And it can make you uncomfortable, but you shouldn't feel uncomfortable. It was just a few seconds to the other person, because I definitely understand that dynamic. Let's move on to the next topic. And I think this one is also playing in the minds of everyone about how pay is going to be altered for working remote. So, but I think there's going to be some layers to this, because
Mhm.
one is that not every company is going to go that route in altering their pay for its team. Other companies like Google and the tech industry, we know they're a copycat industry. What one cat does, the other one's going to come and follow and maybe change it up a little bit. But I think a lot of them we're kind of looking at because they're kind of going out there saying, this is the way we're going to work. And I think that everybody needs to kind of pay attention to those kind of conversations, because you're going to need to address those. And it's better to address those up front. I always say salary needs to be dealt with at the beginning of your job search. Know the market rate going in, and you don't have to do the guesswork when you're being asked salary range. You either confidentially and strategically hold back, or maybe you need to give a range, or whatever your strategy is. Everybody's going to have something different. So, Ebony, since you're the girl, we're going to start with you again,
Oh,
and
yeah.
maybe in some of your experience in with clients, as far as just dealing with the salary question of how that's going to look when there's different market rates for the company.
Yeah, so this is an important question that I really think job seekers really need to pay attention to. I think we were just starting to get to this point where we've been talking a lot, like equal pay was just, a few weeks ago, and
Hmm.
and we talk about, salary transparency. I think this is
Yeah.
going to make that even that much more difficult, right? Because there really isn't a cut and dry range now for that. Like,
Right.
we don't really know what that's going to look like. The
Hmm.
other thing is, for me, I believe that companies pay you for the job you do, not where you're located.
There you
So
go.
it's like
Hmm.
now, right? Like, if I'm able to do my job at the same, you know, expectation or even better than I was in the office, why does the physical location matter?
Hmm.
So now we're not necessarily now some roles we know when we talk about salary ranges are based on where you're located. So
Right.
that's already taken to in account. The remaining of why they're paying you that rate is for the job you do.
Right.
Mhm.
So now we have to go back and question, like, what now, the salary and all of that now becomes a little more confusing and takes away from what we've been trying to really achieve here, right? Which is, equal pay for equal work. And how
Mhm.
are we now doing that if we now have just added in another layer of complexity into that situation and into that equation?
Yeah, totally. And I think Damien's about to cover a whole spectrum in a short period of time, but because he can do that. But I think one of the things, though, Damien, is that when we're looking at it, and Ebony's absolutely right. We were told the bottom line is that you're getting paid for the work. You're not getting paid the location of where you work. But this shift in paradigm could also intimidate and be used to intimidate job seekers who may
Absolutely.
want to work for that company, and are being told through the press that don't go looking for this salary, look for that salary. And I think that's kind of an underlining message too, when people in Google are now saying, hey, we're paying for where we're likely going to look at paying you for your location market rate, as opposed to the work that everybody else has been doing throughout the years.
And I
Mhm.
have a question I want to add to that.
Okay, go
Should
ahead.
it matter if they are current employees, right? Like your current, so like your grandfathered in, right?
Uh-huh.
So we're not, this is only going to apply for new positions or new people coming into the organization,
We
right?
hope that's going to be the case.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
because Facebook made a statement some months ago that if you moved, we're paying you for moving to Iowa away from San Francisco. And they did not make that differentiation.
Mm-mm.
So that's a very interesting topic to discuss too, which we'll probably be talking about for a long time now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
Damien.
my feeling is this: Google, Facebook, they're the big boys in town, and know it. Not afraid to tell you it. But this whole thing about regional pay, for lack of a better term, in my honest opinion,
Mhm.
that is just a way to do two things: bully employees,
Mm-hmm.
because people are petrified about losing their their job. And OPS, the reason why in many cases it's going across the board, no matter how long you've been there, is they are extracting dollars from your performance, your baseline performance, extracting those dollars and putting it into their coffer. So the worker
Mm-hmm.
is being forced to provide a cut when the company is not doing anything. They're just saying, "Hey, look, sorry, this is the way it is. We're the only game in town, and follow the golden rule." And the new golden rule is he or she with the gold rules.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
especially if you're in a state like I'm in North Carolina, it is a right to work state,
Mm-hmm.
hire at will, fire at will. And if there is a part of regional restructuring of your salary and you make a big stink, be prepared. Every time you do that, you're putting your life and your career up there to get chopped down. But still, I think it is important to negotiate for the salary that's being paid in corporate headquarters. And you're right, Mark, having a salary range, a minimum that you're willing to work for. But what's really important is many times, people are going to say, what's your salary? And just expect you to cough it up. When I was interviewing, because I've been out of work 5 times, uh, I would always shift the conversation. So,
Mm-hmm.
Damien, what is your salary range? And I would say, that's a here we go again, right? That's a really good question, but I would like to postpone discussing salary until you have determined that I am the right person. And
Mm-hmm.
there are various other sentences that you can employ to pull them away from talking about salary because he or she who speaks first, meaning volunteering your salary, loses. Because what you've just done is when you have given your exact salary, they now know what your high end is. So they're
Mm-hmm.
not going to go above that. If anything, they're going
Nope.
to try to lowball you. And then you
Right.
have to negotiate back to where you were. So, you know, um, be prepared, but also be prepared to argue for why you deserve the corporate pay or whatever that may be, uh, instead of living with regional pay.
Yeah.
I didn't think that was legal, by the way.
Well, yeah. I mean, you thought which was legal?
I didn't think that this whole thing
Oh
was
well,
legal.
I was going to say those three magic words: class action suit. In some cases, because it's no way to be able to do that fairly, or really competitively if you're using that particular logic. I want to give a couple of shout outs here. My friend Sonal Ball is around, and if you don't catch her Supercharged Friday show, you're missing out. You can catch it in the States. It's 7 p.m. Central Time. She lives in Belgium, but she has a massive audience on her show, and she stopped by to say hi and saying hi back. So, and then there's Elizabeth Billups who joins us every now and then, and actually she joined us on Wednesday show before. So, if you have questions in the chat, by all means, this is a good opportunity for you to catch some really good advice and something useful and actionable for your job search. So feel free to go in and put your question in. The other term I was going to change OPS to is OPP, other people's pockets, and I think that's where employers really have this idea that because you're getting closer and closer to mine, that yours really matter a whole lot more, and really shifts the focus, and it becomes more about them than it does about you and what you need. And I think that might be an opportunity for you to run if it becomes down to that, especially if they're pressing you early on, like Damien said, they're pressing you early on to give up that number. And I think a good strategy, and I had a friend of mine who did this, and it said, I decline to give that, and I understand you need to move on if you feel like it's necessary. And they bantered back and forth for like 20, 25 minutes about that one question. In other words, they really wanted him, but they wanted him to be the first to, they wanted to be the first to draw blood, which, is kind of sad, because really that person, you could tell, wasn't all that experienced. But I think this is uh yeah, it becomes a game of who's going to move first. And I think that's kind of crazy that you have to do that. Brenda says that the information is very insightful. Thank you, Brenda. We'll hope that's what we strive to do. I think the other question when you talk about salary, and the other layer is that, okay, you kind of wonder, the whole region job market salary range is nefarious and very much undefined if you never used that as an excuse before. You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
people move now, you just kind of wonder, okay, so, how do you know, how have you figured this quickly what the market rate is when everybody's shifted? Not just particularly like what it was before the pandemic, because there's some companies that kind of went up on their salary, as we've
Mhm.
found out recently, and they gave them more money, or for the fact that maybe that money may not be the issue. Maybe you need to have a more of a customized insurance because of the area you lived in, and maybe even how far you have to travel to get health care access. So there's interesting discussions about here. What's your favorite advice for those who might be in those situations where money is not going to be particularly the issue, but also there's other aspects of the compensation package that they may need to go ahead and leverage? Ebony?
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell individuals, and I think that it really does depend on where you are in your career and your finances, right? So, like, salary is just one of the many things that you can negotiate. And I think that most job seekers stop at salary. They don't look at the other benefits. I think this
Mhm.
is important where we have to do our research and really understand what are some of the other benefits that the company offers. And sometimes I know, even for myself personally, I have asked for copies of, like, what are your, like, give me more information about benefits and other compensation before I even give my salary, because those things were important to me, right? So, for example, I remember when I first started out in my career, I started out with a 4 weeks vacation. So going somewhere else that had 2 weeks, I'm like, I have to now, at a minimum, have three, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if a company, it wasn't about the money for me, it was more so about the vacation or about professional development and paying for some of those certifications that I wanted. um some people, maybe, the company car, vehicles, your phone, and all these other expenses, that you have, that, just play more of a factor than just, what you bring home, because those other benefits play into a factor of your expenses, right? So you really want to take that into account. So I'm always for making sure you understand more of the bigger picture. I mean, because when they give you that salary, right, that's the total compensation. So they're not just thinking about, they add in, I've seen companies say, well, this is how much we pay for your insurance and all these things. So your total compensation is X, right? And so if you have one party focusing on, one number, you have the other party focusing on a completely different number. It is really important that you really understand the total compensation and what that involves.
You bring up a great question, and you bring up a great strategy, and I think it's true. People do think of that number, and you have to be able to define that number. Do you want my total salary compensation, or do you want the total compensation package number you're asking for, or do you want the just the salary for. And then when you're giving numbers, make sure everybody's giving the same number. So if you say
Mhm.
150k, that 150k is an inclusive, not outside of, or whether it includes the actual number that you're going to be getting every week and every year
Right.
as far as the salary.
Yeah,
So
because
we go ahead.
companies have that. Some companies, most, right? So they'll say, we offer a 15% bonus. That's if they do well. If they don't do well, you don't get that bonus. So you
Mhm.
need to take that into consideration. Maybe that 15% needs to be added in your base, because if we don't do well, then I don't get that. And a lot of times, job seekers add that number in the back of their mind and say, okay, well, when March comes, I'm going to get X amount. And
Hmm.
then in December, when the company says, hey, well, because of COVID and everything that's happened this year, we're not going to pay out that. Well,
Yeah.
you've anticipated a 15% bonus come, in a few months, and the company's now said you're not going to get that. So now
Hmm.
how do you compensate for that, right? Because you've
Right.
made in your mind that that was, what you were going to receive. Add that number in your base. So whether you, and they don't have to know that, right? But whether
Right.
you win or whether they win or whether they lose, you still win, right? So I think that's important for job seekers to consider. Do they give you, equity or stock into the organization? That can be more important than salary, right? Like the people
Absolutely.
who invested in Facebook, when they were offering that, now can sit at home and say, I'm going to retire at, X, right? I'm going to retire at 40 because you've made that investment. So make sure that you are, to me, it's not thinking about where you are currently, but it's about where you want to go. You really have to think about your future when we think about, salaries.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Damien, before I get your response to, I want to add on that there are some companies who are actually have altered their PTO status and the personal time off and how they're divvying. Some of them stopped actually having the personal time off and they plan to reenact it for whatever reason that is. But I think you have to kind of know that information too. But so not only you're just looking at total compensation, what is the company doing right now? That changes the way that they've been doing things in the past and how they're going to do things in the future. That's important intel, especially when we're talking about trying to understand how the whole conversation is going to take place. Go ahead, Damien.
What I was going to say is, I always recommend salary is one process, benefits are another, because
Mm,
when you are negotiating, you want to come up as high as you possibly can. And even if they throw out a range, I'll make this up, between $10,000 and $25,000, you can look them in the eye and say, $25,000 is a great place to begin.
hmm.
And you've automatically got the top of you're going to get, and now it's going to be top plus plus.
Right.
Because in all of the negotiations I've done, uh, companies will tell you that benefits are standard, and that isn't true.
Right.
You need to
It isn't.
know those unique additional perks, sign on bonus, and then all the other things that Ebony talked about first. But get your salary done and then move on to what the meat of the issue ends up being. Um, and that's kind of it. That's how I feel.
Yeah. Let me read a couple of questions from our audience here. Brenda Dupree, she says, "What are your thoughts on corporations' requests of the candidate to create a presentation based upon a prompt? Example, industry strategy presentation with outcomes. What's the best way to protect your intellectual property, or should we be concerned?" There's a lot of layers to that particular question, and there are three separate questions in that question. I would, and it takes us away for a little bit, but then again, maybe not, because I think to some degree your presentation is going to set the tone for the salary that you're going to get offered if you have a presentation. Some people do, and this has gone on for years, right? People have done PowerPoint presentation since the '90s, as far as I remember it.
Mhm.
Some voluntarily, some have been requested to do
Yep.
this. But I think one of the things that she's saying, if I'm understanding the question, is that she's they're giving her a subject. Brenda, you can let me know if this is true. They're giving her a subject, and she's required to make a presentation. I don't think it's the same day, or maybe it is the same day. It's not said here in the question. But if we can reimagine it a little bit, and I'll go with Damien, you first on this one. Uh, this person is being given a topic, and they're expected to give a presentation on it. Um, I don't know if the question is actually whether if it's a fair thing. Employers can ask test you on anything, but is there a strategy in which that person can use in order to make themselves a little bit more successful than being surprised by it?
And I think there's two separate answers. The first is being asked to provide a presentation. That really depends on the area that you're in and what your expertise is. But you can certainly expect that with managing, marketing, sales, uh, because again, they want to see one, how you think, two, how well you present, three, are you good on your toes with quick thinking, and four, that you have utilized industry data to make your point, because that shows two things. One, you understand that you need to do a presentation that meets their needs, but you've had the foresight to do the research, and then with charts or anything else that you talk about, you can make a dynamic presentation. They're usually short, 5 minutes, I think 15 at most. But
Right.
I want to go to the next question, which is intellectual property, and I certainly understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Guard your material that is used, and when you're doing a presentation, whereas you may be tempted to show them your proprietary whatever it may be, you don't want to do that, because it's possible, and I've seen this happen sadly, where
Mm-hmm.
people come in, you know, one, two, three interviews, they give presentations, and they spill out all sorts of valuable information
Mm-hmm.
that the company then takes and says, "Hey, great, see you later, next."
Yep. And they end up using it, using that idea the person had presented. And that,
Absolutely.
yeah, and that's where people get off. And I think, back in the early days of social media, because I was kind of there, uh, that people didn't want to participate online and do all that because they're afraid that they'll give all the goodies away. And my response was, well, then your expertise wasn't all that deep to begin with, because if you're afraid of giving away, I've been giving away for 10 years. I have. I've got 700 articles to prove that. I've got 200 plus podcasts to prove it. I've got a bunch of media stuff to prove and I continue to give it away free. I don't worry about intellectual property in that kind of way because the job search in our craft always is evolving. Go ahead, Ebony. I'm sorry. I had to just throw that out there to add some perspective that if you're really an expert, you know how to parse your information, how you give it and how much to give it. But I think it's still a fair question on the intellectual property portion of it.
No, you're absolutely right. And I remember again starting on social and the same thing, right? Like I'm giving away, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to give you my good stuff, right? So if this is the good stuff, just imagine what you're going to get when you hire me, right? So just
Right.
Right.
so
Good.
Absolutely.
Good.
so, but I have a few one client example, even and myself included. But I'm gonna go back to the
Mhm.
first part. I do agree with Damien. It does really what I've seen, it definitely depends on the industry. Sales and marketing, most definitely, they have some type of sales pitch or something that they will ask you to do. I will say I am an advocate for employees, so I feel like the amount of time that we see individuals spending on these, that you really should be compensated for the amount of time. I've seen people
Yes.
spend upwards to 6 and 8, 10 hours.
And I've seen
Doing
people
something
be
stressful.
compensated for their
Yeah,
time
yeah.
recently. Yeah.
So I really think that that's important, when we spend the time and you don't land the role. If you really spent, and it's part of the interview. I mean, I think you should spend, upwards to 10 or 15 hours preparing for an interview. So
Hmm.
it's not that, but this is a little different, than that. However,
Yeah.
when it comes to intellectual property, I say that there can be a balance, right? If you're doing some type of presentation, are you leaving your content there for individuals, right? I've had individuals say, "Oh, great, can you send me a copy? I'll be happy to share it with you once I'm on board." So.
Right.
Once I'm here, I'll be more than happy to share with you or give you that information. But until then, I'm going to protect that. So I think that there could be ways that you can present that in a way. If you are leaving hard copy documents for everyone, could be a little different. Maybe you want to ask for that content back. I do like to leave some content out so that they don't have everything if you are afraid of that.
Right.
You can change some numbers and data and figures of that nature. But I do think that it's very important. However, at the same time, you can use that to your advantage, right? Let them know that you're willing to, share as much information, once you get the role.
Right.
But yeah.
Or even at that, and I've actually seen this done where somebody have found out what the numbers that the company actually deals with. It made an imaginary scenario
Mhm.
where he left none of his content on the board,
Yeah.
but used them, and
Oh yeah.
then and used that as a teaser for them to hire him because it said, well, I can give you more information, but you know, hey, walk away with it and see who bluffs first. I mean, after all, if it's an interview, if somebody wants you and you just gave them kind of a blueprint but didn't give them all of it, man, I mean, just be very shrewd. And the word I like
There
using
we
is
go.
shrewd because, that's the way the companies are going to operate. Therefore, that's the way that you should operate. So Brenda says, tremendous insight. Thank you. But I want to hit up Tina's question before we end it all. Boy, this time has flew by.
Oh
Speaking of
yeah.
insurance, as we were talking about compensation, should you let the interviewer know that you don't need health insurance when the time comes to talk about total compensation? That's an interesting question, and I'm going to start this one off kind of because I've been in those situations where my wife had such great health benefits that I didn't really need it, but I got them anyway because those were so good. And I can rearrange the pieces to kind of instead of this, can I have more PTO time? Can I
Mhm.
have more vacation time? So I would say just don't leave it on the table. Use it to your advantage. There might be some other things, and that takes some research as to what precedents may have been started. But there was a company that I worked for. Actually, I didn't work for. I worked for the sister company, but they offered free gym access. I mean, they paid for the gym, but nobody took it because nobody knew it was there. This person was able to rearrange it as part of the health benefit. And I
Ah,
thought that was so brilliant to
yeah.
be able to do that. And that made it work for you. So I would say don't ever leave a part of a package completely off the table. Find other ways to be creative and to use that to your advantage. Your thoughts, and then we'll probably end it there. Damien, go ahead.
Again, you're going to run into the precedent issue where you're substituting dollars for healthcare.
Right.
I think what you will get the feedback is that healthcare, is a benefit. It's standard for all of our employees, and I don't think you necessarily have to negotiate that away. I mean,
Right.
you can accept it, but there are other things. And, there's this old Chinese proverb that Damien wrote, and that is no ASCII, no Getty.
Right.
All they can do is say no.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes you can take that no and flip it into a yes because of your experience, right? In
Mm-hmm.
my case, they upgraded the position because I then had someone reporting to me, and my volume went through the roof. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, don't give away what you don't have to give away, and don't be afraid to ask, because if they say no, fine, go on to the next thing.
Ebony, go ahead.
Yeah, I love that. So, but that's my point exactly. That I was going to mention. So, I've worked with a client who was who was retiring from the military. So she had benefits already from healthcare, so did
Mm-hmm.
not need those benefits. And so one of the things that we did was to negotiate that. I mean, that into pay now. So it was like, hey, I'm not going to utilize or need these benefits because I'm coming from, I have military benefits here. However, instead of that, in lieu of, right? So now and I think it was about maybe a $10,000 or $15,000 bump that she received for that. But she could still use them, but she knew that, hey, my benefits are probably going to be much better anyway, and so on and so forth. So the only thing we can do was ask the question, right? And so it was like, I mean, they may say yes, they may say no, but if we don't ask, then we just don't know. So always go in with a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, make that part of your strategy though, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's important. I don't lay all your cards out on the table and say, hey, I'm not going to need this. So, make sure that you really think that through and make sure it's part of your strategy.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's great advice. Like I said, just be conscientious as
Mhm.
to what actually is being offered,
Mhm.
and know the total package before you start giving out precious intel
Mhm.
uh, to them. Because again, idea be shrewd. Just be shrewd. Uh, we're coming up to the top of the hour. We really thank Ebony for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Great
so
job.
much.
Very much. I had a preview of her on our Wednesday show. I said, we got to get her on the Friday show for sure, Damien. So glad that she made time for us.
Yes.
Honored
Thank you.
that you did. What you got coming up?
Oh, man. All right. So I am actually just finishing a master class. So it is for those individuals who are looking to re-enter in the workforce. So I'm
Mhm.
finishing that class up, and I will be posting that here next week. But it is for those individuals, again, who are looking to re-enter their workforce. Some individuals have been off of work for about a year or so, and they're looking to land that next role, and how to really articulate that value and really understand, how do I really talk about the year that I've been off and what I've done. So we're going to work with individuals to boost that confidence and land them roles that they definitely and so deserve.
Good deal.
Yeah.
That's going to be excellent. Thank you very much. A masterclass. I haven't heard that term in a little while.
Long time.
Yeah, right. Damien, what you got coming up, sir?
Um, Fortunately, I mean, providing the virus variations don't hit, we're finally going to be able to go back to meeting in person,
Mm,
because it's hard to give emotional support through a screen.
sure.
And as a result of that, we're working on all sorts of different mechanics. And I have an article that's coming out in a part of an article rather for Upjourney.
Okay.
So, much like you guys, busy, 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 but always reaching out to those who need our help, and
Yeah.
not being afraid to share your knowledge without strings. Because if a company wants you, they want you for you, your
Yeah.
experience, what you've learned, your maturity, etc.
Mhm.
The position is a guide, if you will.
Right.
And never forget that the strongest time to negotiate anything is when you have a written job offer. Because I know a number of people that have gone back and renegotiated small portions of their agreement upwards. And the reason why a company is not hesitant in many cases is they've already showed their cards. They have already let the other contenders go on. And so if you're that person, uh, don't be afraid to be to ask for more. But again, on the other hand, you don't want to be a pig either.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I have coming up lots of things going on next week, of course. We'll be back here next Friday. I believe, yeah, next Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern, 12 o'clock Central. We'll be back here. On Wednesday, of course, Job Seeker Nation will be the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern. On Tuesday, I have a show that will, where I have Antonio Boyd from the Future of School, which is there in North Carolina. Damien, they're an e-learning center, and they're changing the game, the way we learn, and how that's going to look in our career. So we'll be talking to Antonio Boyd. He is the executive vice president of Future of School. You can also find their page there on LinkedIn. I don't know if they have a Facebook page for all you Facebook folks. And also, I've got a show coming up on Wednesday after Job Seeker Nation. It's going to be streaming all through my pages. So there's a lot of information for job seekers with guests all next week. It's going to be pretty busy. So stay tuned. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. We do stream to YouTube, Facebook, now Twitter, and also LinkedIn. So definitely enjoy those. Share the goods that you've been learning from us and share the shows, and subscribe to the channel, which we also have on YouTube, the Modern Job Search Checklist. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to wave bye-bye now. Have a great week. We'll see you next Friday.